These are the two most epic deaths in human history. Number 1, the death of Ben Salomon. This is the story of a dentist who became a field medic and killed 98 enemy soldiers before finally dying. Salomon was drafted into the U.S. Army in 1940, 3 years after graduating from USC Dental School. Salomon was an excellent soldier and was very good with both a rifle and a pistol. He was quickly promoted, becoming a lieutenant and then a captain in 1944. He served as the regimental dental officer for the 105th Infantry Regiment. In June 1944, Salomon and the 105th were sent into active combat in Saipan. Fighting in the Pacific was known for being very bloody. Many soldiers were badly hurt. Even the battalion's field surgeon was seriously injured, so Salomon offered to replace the injured surgeon. By July, both the Americans and Japanese had lost many men. Although the Japanese still had 4,000 soldiers left on the island, they knew they couldn't win. So they made a final decision for a banzai charge, a mission aimed only at killing as many American soldiers as possible, with no plan to survive or retreat. Early in the morning of July 7, 1944, the remaining 4,000 Japanese soldiers launched their last attack. Salomon's field tent was just 50 yards behind the front foxholes, and within minutes, the tent was filled up with over 30 wounded soldiers. He worked hard to care for the wounded, but soon the Japanese broke through the front lines. When he looked outside his tent, he saw a Japanese soldier stabbing a wounded American lying on the ground. Angry, Salomon grabbed a rifle from one of his patients, shot the Japanese soldier, and killed him. Seeing the situation really getting worse, Salomon told the other medics to evacuate the wounded soldiers and that he would stay behind to cover them as they escaped. Salomon then picked up a rifle and went to the front lines. He saw 4 men manning a machine gun fall to enemy fire. He rushed to the machine gun and manned it himself, firing into the charging Japanese soldiers. He continued to fight from that position until he was eventually overrun by enemy soldiers. Days later, when the Americans returned to the battlefield, Salomon's body was found slumped over the machine gun, with about 98 dead Japanese soldiers piled in front of him. Salomon's body had about 76 bullet holes and many bayonet wounds, 24 of which he might have obtained even before dying. Blood on the ground showed that, even while badly injured, Salomon had repositioned the machine gun several times. Even though he had saved many lives that day, he was not given a Medal of Honor because of the Geneva Convention rule, which said that medical officers were not allowed to bear arms against an enemy. For many years, many generals recommended him for the Medal of Honor. Salomon was mostly forgotten in history. But in 2002, President George Bush finally gave him the Medal of Honor. That's 58 years after his death. Totally deserved. The second most epic death is the story of the greatest wingman in human history. It's a dark night in 12th century Japan, and a Buddhist monk named Benkei is walking through the streets of Kyoto. Now Kyoto is full of temples, so monks are a normal sight, but Benkei is not like other monks. At 6 feet 6 inches, he is much taller than everyone around him, and he is carrying a weapon that looks like a mix between a sword and a long spear called a naginata. His face looked more like someone on a hunt than someone searching for inner peace. That night, Benkei was hunting for his last victim. You see, Benkei was actually a Sohei, a trained battle-hardened warrior monk. He had encountered many samurais and hated them. He felt they were a very arrogant class, unworthy of their status in society. The world would be a better place with less of them around, and this led him on his bloody quest to duel and defeat 1,000 samurai, collecting their swords as trophies after each victory. By this time, Benkei had collected 999 swords and was out that night looking for a final opponent. Near Goto Tenjin Shrine, he heard the sound of a flute. When he looked to see who was playing, he saw a small, thin samurai. Around this samurai's waist was a beautiful, gilded katana perfect to complete Benkei's sword collection. Benkei quickly challenged the samurai to a duel. The small man put away his flute and, to Benkei's surprise, agreed to fight. The two walked to Gojo Bridge and drew their weapons. Feeling confident, Benkei charged in. But even though he was way taller than the samurai, Benkei was quickly defeated. The samurai didn't kill him, but simply walked away. Benkei was shocked and couldn't believe what had happened. In the days that followed, his shock turned into anger and frustration. Wondering how he lost to a small samurai, he had beaten much bigger men before. Determined to get revenge, he waited at the temple, hoping to see the samurai again. Eventually, the samurai returned, and Benkei challenged him to another duel. And once again, Benkei lost. Ashamed, he bowed and admitted defeat. He told the samurai that he would give up his life as a monk and follow him as a loyal retainer. The samurai, who was Minamoto no Yoshitsune of the legendary Minamoto clan, accepted. Benkei joined Yoshitsune on his adventures, and the two become inseparable. They fight side by side in the different wars, but when Yoshitsune's half-brother, Yoritamo, becomes shogun, jealousy and mistrust grow between the brothers. Soon, Yoshitsune and Benkei are on the run, being hunted by Yoritamo and his soldiers. They find shelter with another clan, the Fujiwara, and live in peace for a few years under their protection. This peace didn't last. With pressure and likely bribes from Yoritamo, the Fujiwara finally betray Yoshitsune. Fujiwara, who once protected them, turn against them, and on June 15th, 1189, at the Battle of Koromagawa, Yoshitsune and Benkei are surrounded and outnumbered with 500 of Fujiwara's men attacking their castle. The battle began, and Yoshitsune's men fought bravely, and Benkei is unstoppable on the battlefield, cutting down enemies who were much smaller than him. But even with their strength, Yoshitsune's men start to fall. With only a few retainers left, Yoshitsune knows the battle is lost. Yoshitsune turned to Benkei and says he plans to commit seppuku inside the castle. He needed time to prepare, and Benkei understands what he must do. He walked to the bridge, the only way into the castle, and stands alone against the Fujiwara army. Fujiwara then orders his men to charge, but wave after wave, Benkei cuts them down one after the other. No one could get past. Some stories say Benkei killed 300 soldiers by himself on that bridge. He stood tall behind a pile of fallen warriors, daring more men to come. But none of Fujiwara's soldiers want to face him. They all knew stepping onto the bridge meant certain death. Seeing his men too scared to attack, Fujiwara calls for his archer. The archers fire a volley of arrows, hitting Benkei in the chest, but he still doesn't move. They fire again, and still nothing changes. Benkei's body is now full of arrows, but he remains standing, blocking the way. They all stare at him across the bridge, too afraid to act. Finally, Fujiwara orders some of his men to move in. They slowly approach, and when they reach Benkei, they realize he was already dead. Even in death, Benkei stood tall, leaning on his spear for support. Benkei had planned his final stand to buy as much time as possible for Yoshitsune. By staying upright and showing no pain, he made it seem like he was ready to keep fighting. And because of his sacrifice, Yoshitsune had enough time to complete the seppuku ritual and kept his honor. Like and subscribe. Today, we're diving into the 3 most brutal revenge stories in history. 1. Olga and the Drevlians. We're starting with one of the most legendary revenge stories ever, when Olga of Kiev delivered some of the most cold-blooded payback in history after her husband's brutal execution. It's the year 945, and Prince Igor is ruling over Kievan Rus, a kingdom that covered parts of modern-day Ukraine, Bulgaria, and Russia. To the west are the Drevlians, a tribe that really didn't like the Kievan Rus. Even though they sometimes fought together against the Byzantine Empire, they weren't exactly friends. When Igor's father, Oleg, died in 912, the Drevlians thought, finally, now we don't have to pay tribute anymore. Igor waits patiently for his money for 33 years, but then decides that he had waited way too long. So, he travels to the Drevlian capital city of Khorasan himself to collect the tribute. He shows up with a big army, demands the money, but the Drevlians grudgingly pay him. On his way back, Igor feels the payment wasn't enough. So, he turns around with just a few of his men and heads back to Khorasan to demand more. When he gets there and starts shouting for more tribute, the Drevlians are not happy. They kill his men right away and save Igor for a truly horrific execution. They bent 2 birch trees toward each other, tied one of Igor's legs to each tree. They cut the supports, and the trees snapped back to their original place, ripping Igor into 2 pieces. Sounds terrible, right? But it didn't stop there. Prince Mal, the ruler of the Drevlians, was feeling pretty good about himself, so he thought, why not take over the whole empire and marry the beautiful Olga, who was Igor's widow? But this is where everything went wrong for the Drevlians, because Olga was not someone you wanted to mess with, and she was really pissed about the death of her husband. Prince Mal sends 20 of his best men to Kiev to tell Olga what happened to her husband and ask her to marry him so they could combine their lands. To his surprise, Olga doesn't freak out. Instead, she seems calm and tells the messengers that they should rest by their boat for now, and tomorrow, her men would bring them into the city to meet her. The next morning, Olga's men walk down to the shore to get the ambassadors. But instead of just leading them to the city, they pick up the entire boat, with all 20 men still in. The ambassadors are amazed by Olga's hospitality. What great service, they think, feeling like royalty. But things take a sudden turn. See, while they were resting, Olga's men spent the whole night digging a huge trench. When they bring the Drevlians to the site, Olga orders them to dump the boat and all the men into the hole. Then, she commands her men to bury them alive. The Drevlians can do nothing as the dirt is piled on them, and soon they're all buried. But Olga wasn't done yet. She sends her own messengers to Khorasan, asking Prince Mal to send his best men to Kiev to escort his future bride. The Drevlians, not knowing what happened to the first group, send a party of important men as escorts. When they arrive in Kiev, Olga tells them to relax in a bathhouse her men had prepared, saying she would join them after they freshened up. Her men lead the Drevlians into the bathhouse, lock the doors, and then set the place on fire, killing all the men inside. After that, Olga sends more messengers to Khorasan, telling Prince Mal to get ready for her arrival. Olga has one request. She wants a feast to mourn her late husband before she marries Prince Mal. The Drevlians, still unaware of what's happening in Kiev, prepare a grand feast for her. Olga arrives. The party begins, and she encourages the Drevlians to drink and mourn with her. They happily do so, and by the end of the night, they're all completely drunk. Then, Olga orders her men to start killing the now drunk and helpless Drevlians. Surprise! Olga's men had been drinking water all night while pretending to drink alcohol. They were sober and ready. Historians say Olga cheered her men on as they went around slaughtering thousands of Drevlians, including Prince Mal. Afterward, Olga returned to Kiev to raise an army to finish off the Drevlians once and for all. The Drevlians finally get the message that Olga wasn't joking. She comes back to Khorasan with a huge army and starts a siege on the city. The people of Khorasan suffer without food or supplies for over a year. Finally, Olga sends a message saying that if they pay their tribute, it'll all be over. Having already been tricked 3 times, the Drevlians are scared but agree to pay the tribute, fearing that Olga might still kill them. Olga responds, saying, "I know I got a little carried away after Igor's death, but it's fine now. Just send me 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each house, and I'll leave you alone." The Drevlians think it's a strange request, but they're so relieved that their nightmare might finally end. They quickly go out and gather the birds for her. That night, Olga's men tie small pieces of sulfur wrapped in cloth to each bird's leg, light the cloth on fire, and release the birds into the night. Olga and her men watch as 1,000 little flames fly off into the distance, heading straight for the nest the birds had built on buildings in Khorasan. Within hours, the entire city is engulfed in flames. Olga watches as the city burns to the ground, and she later claims all Drevlian land as her own. So, yeah, they really should have just paid the tribute. 2. Genghis Khan and the Khwarezmian Empire. This story is probably the best example of mess with me and find out. And like most things involving Genghis Khan, the death toll in this revenge story is insane. So let's get into it. In 1218, Genghis Khan sends a caravan of 450 merchants and traders to the city of Otrar in the Khwarezmian Empire, hoping to expand his trade network to the west. But when the merchants arrive, the governor of the city, a man named Inalchuk, orders their execution. He then takes all the goods they brought and sells them to the rich people in the city of Bokhara. One camel driver from the caravan manages to escape and makes his way back to Mongolia to tell Genghis what happened. Furious but trying to stay calm, Genghis sends a small group of diplomats, 1 Muslim and 2 Mongolians, to Shah Muhammad, the ruler of the Khwarezmian Empire, to negotiate peace. All the Shah has to do is hand over Inalchuk so he can be punished and everything will be fine. But instead of giving up Inalchuk, the Shah kills the Muslim diplomat and sends the others back. The Shah then shaves the beards of the 2 Mongolians, which is the ultimate sign of disrespect in their culture, and sends them back to Genghis. Now, Genghis is absolutely furious. He quickly raises an army of 200,000 men to crush the Khwarezmian Empire. The Mongols waste no time and attack multiple cities at once. Genghis' 2 sons, Chagatai and Ogadai, lead a siege on Otrar to capture Inalchuk, while Genghis himself heads to Bokhara to punish those who took his goods. Using new siege weapons they had gotten from China, the Mongols soon destroy the walls of Bokhara, and Genghis rides into the heart of the city. He loudly declares to the citizens that he was sent by God to punish them for their sins. Then, he orders his men to kill everyone in the city. Meanwhile, his sons are still trying to break into Otrar. After 5 months of suffering, a general inside the city realizes it's hopeless and decides to defect with a few thousand men. He opens the gates and joins the Mongols. But it turns out the Mongols don't trust traitors, no matter which side they're on. So, they kill the general and his men. With the gates wide open, the Mongols ride into Otrar and capture Inalchuk. Inalchuk is brought to Genghis, and as punishment for his greed, Genghis has molten silver poured into his eyes and ears. After this, Genghis and his army go on to destroy every city in the Khwarezmian Empire. By the end of this revenge campaign, the Khwarezmian Empire is gone, and Genghis is said to have killed an estimated 15 million people. To put it in perspective, that's about the combined population of New York City, Los Angeles, and Chicago. 3. The brutal death of Akhu Yadav, an Indian man who had raped over 200 women. On August 13, 2004, Akhu Yadav was standing trial in Kasturba, India, but he was no stranger to crime. Over the past 10 years, he had allegedly raped more than 200 women, and now, those women came back for revenge while he stood in court. When the women tried to report Yadav and his gang to the police, they were ignored and laughed at. So, they decided to take matters into their own hands. A group of 200 women stormed the court, ran past stunned officials, and knocked Yadav to the ground before attacking him for 15 minutes. They threw chili peppers in his face, pelted him with stones, and one woman even cut off his penis with a vegetable knife. By the time the mob stopped, Yadav had more than 70 stab wounds. He was killed on the marble floor of the Nagpur District Court, paying for his alleged crimes. However, many of the women involved in the attack were later put on trial for their actions. Like and subscribe.